Hello and welcome back to the fifth game of this top 16 of the Victory Road Spring Series Grand Finals. I'm Jamie Boyd and I'm going to be joined for the first time by Ben Kiriakou. Ben, how have you enjoyed the game so far today?
It's been an absolute rollercoaster ride. We've seen some games that are really nice and slow-paced. We've seen a lot of Registeel doing its boosting up, and of course that last game with Mamoswine just taking it home alongside that Charizard and just being able to pivot out, do so much damage. And just one of the peak moments for me was when that Mamoswine went for its Dynamax form while it was burnt and still came through absolutely triumphant, especially being able to not take any damage from that heavy slam from Glastria that turn. It's just a brilliant moment where the game pace just completely changed and it went right in its favor.
You can see the value of those more unique Pokemon choices going into the teams. We've seen the Mamoswine put in the work. We saw the Registeel being able to put in a lot of work as well. So I'm looking forward to see if there's any more Pokemon that are slightly more unique to these players that are going to be putting in work for them. But we are going to be going into this game featuring our returning champion from the previous Winter Series here with Kevin Salvetto, who's going to be facing up against Víctor Medina. So we're going to be going to put up our poll again. Once again, put into the chat the exclamation point followed by the name of the player you think is going to be taking this game. We do have our returning champion versus Victor here.
Yeah, I feel like it would be probably a little bit more skewed towards Kevin's side of the field being our returning champion, but of course, you know, these players, every series is slightly different and every tournament is slightly different, and you know it could go either way. So yeah, definitely everyone show your support for both Kevin and Victor here to see who you think is going to come out on top. Of course, before we go straight over to our player profiles and of course get into the match.
So it looks like we're going to have a relatively even split here once again for this poll. Very even support going for Victor and Kevin, who of course did end up facing each other in the top 16 in that previous Winter Series as well. So going to be facing each other once again in the top 16 of a Victory Road Series. So going to be a really interesting match going forward here. Looks like Victor slightly picked out Kevin there in that poll, but of course we're going to have to go into the game to see who is going to be coming out on top. So we can have a look at both these players here. We're going to be starting off with Victor here. So we've been seeing a reasonable amount of sun coming out from these players, but we're going to be seeing the rain with that Politoed and Kingdra here. So very interesting team coming out for Victor, who was of course the champion of two of the series of the Victory Road Circuit, once in the Winter Series and once in the Spring Series as well, and also able to get that top 4 in a European International Championship back in the senior division, as well as getting top 8 at that World Championships in the senior division as well. But I'm very interested to see that rain core coming out here.
Definitely, and Politoed Kingdra is something that has been in VGC for as long as I can remember, certainly going way back into the days of 2012. 2013, especially, where it became very, very popular, and there's a reason for that. It's just so powerful as a combination, and maybe dropped off the radar a little bit. But of course, Kingdra has access to some a lot more things than it used to back in the day, where it only used Dragon and Water moves. Now it's got access to Hurricane. Of course, always had access to Ice Beam as well, and there's reason to use it. But of course, pairing it with a slightly more bulky pivoting team where you have that Galarian Moltres going in, it will really, I think, come down for Victor as to what the matchup looks like, and you know, how he wants to play that, whether he wants to be really aggressive with that Politoed Kingdra or maybe play a little bit slower with that Galarian Moltres. But of course, let's not forget Kevin Salvetto, a fantastic player here who is on your screen right now, and of course the champion of the Winter Series Victory Road Circuit, as well as some great in-tournament achievements. Top 32 at the Bochum Regionals, top 8 at the 2016 Liverpool Regionals, and of course top 16 in the World Championships in the Senior Division in 2015.
Yeah, so going to be bringing that Metagross out here, the first Metagross that we're going to be seeing in this top 16 here. A Pokemon that really does benefit from that Dynamax. being able to go for those max steel spikes or those max quakes to boost up its defenses and make it even more difficult to KO, especially with that weakness policy as well. So gonna be interesting to see this Metagross going forward here. And we've got that pairing of the Grimmsnarl and Zapdos that started to pick up a bit in Series 7, because you do have access to go for those screens. You can go for those fake tears as well with the Grimmsnarl to be able to do some massive damage with the Zapdos here. So just some nice picks coming out from Kevin here. Quite a big shake up from what he used in that Series 8 Winter Series with the Sun here. No Sun at all, but going to be facing down the rain, so maybe didn't want to be bringing that in the first place.
Yeah, and certainly seeing the team from Kevin, I'm sure as soon as Victor sees that Tapu Fini and the Metagross, he's going to want to the Tapu Fini and the Zapdos even may not want to bring that Rain Core, being really quite threatened by it. And certainly I think Tapu Fini is going to be one of those pivotal Pokemon in the matchup, and it does have to tangle with that Rillaboom, and it's not something that Tapu Fini ever wants to do, but there's a few ways that Kevin has with that Zapdos and Metagross to be able to resist it. So I think it's going to be quite cyclic in the way that works. It's going to be one Pokemon beats another Pokemon, and really come down to the positioning and what two Pokemon are on the field at any given time.
And a really interesting item choice coming out from that Politoed. We haven't seen Blunder Policy used too often. We saw it on a Milotic here and there that was going for Hypnosis, and Politoed could potentially be going for the same thing there, but of course has to contend with that Tapu Fini, but you also have a Rillaboom to be able to override that Misty Terrain. So a very unique choice coming out on that Politoed, and we're going to have to see if it pays off here for Victor's side of the field. But yes, the Tapu Fini and the Zapdos do seem to be crucial members to be able to deal with the Rain Core on Victor's side of the field. The rain does mean that the Zapdos does have 100% accurate Hurricanes. Of course, the only flying move that it has on the special side, so it is forced to run it, but then that does become 100% accuracy. So the Zapdos here going to be quite a nice pick to deal with the rain. It can also do very well against the rest of the Pokemon on Kevin's side of the field. On Victor's side of the field, but you do have to be wary of that Raichu because of the Lightning Rod, but at the same time, you just go for those Airstreams instead to start boosting up your speed and doing some massive damage.
Definitely are, and of course there is that potential heat wave as well from the Zapdos. May be able to just turn the rain off if it fancies going for a Dynamax. We'll have to see how this matchup shakes up as we see Grimmsnarl and Metagross come out here, and Raichu and Moltres come out here. So Metagross immediately in danger.
Yeah, but then it does have to contend with that weakness policy. The Moltres could potentially activate, and you do have the Grimmsnarl over there to help out the Metagross going for those light screens as well to be able to increase the special defense even further. So you do have a choice here to make if you are the Moltres. You can go for that nasty plot to try and do some massive damage to the Metagross without activating the weakness policy this turn, but then you leave yourself open to some big damage coming out from the Metagross, and even the Grimmsnarl potentially, most likely carrying that Spirit Break as well, as we so often see, would do a lot of damage to the Moltres. And especially if it doesn't go for the Dynamax, would do a very, very decent chunk. Maybe even putting it into Berserk range here. And we are seeing a Dynamax coming out from Victor's side of the field, so most likely going to be that Moltres here. Not opting for any of the nasty plots that could come out from the Moltres, just wanting to do some big damage with this Moltres.
Certainly, and it could be going straight for the Airstream. Grimmsnarl, one of those Pokemon known for launching Thunder Waves out potentially, but not going to be affecting that Moltres. So Max Airstreams are really nice to be able to just boost up the speed on your side of the field, but maybe Victor can tend to just launch out some damage with a Max Darkness. And of course, Metagross on Kevin's side of the field, not going to waste any time either, just making sure that it's got all of its HP boost from that Dynamax, going to be able to take anything the Moltres comes back at it with, and hopefully reply with a big 2+ attack. Fake Out coming out onto the Grimmsnarl, going to be able to stop it doing any shenanigans here, and of course the Max Airstream coming out as well. Going to be raising the speed on Victor's side of the field, not going to make too much difference to the speed tiers at this juncture of the game, but it is quite importantly going to stop that Grimmsnarl from being able to hang around on the field for too long. And of course, no activation of the weakness policy means that Max Ruckfall from the Metagross doesn't quite pick up the KO onto the Moltres, who looks like it's activating its weakness policy here, as well as its Berserk, so going right from neutral straight up to 3+ stages of special attack, and that is going to be something that Kevin has to be really worried about, especially now that it's at 1 stage of increased speed.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the awkward things about the Metagross, because the opponent can always just avoid activating that weakness policy. If we did see a darkness into that Metagross, most likely not enough to pick up the KO without any increased stages of special attack, and then we saw that it did over half with the Rockfall in response to the Moltres. So if the weakness policy was activated on the Metagross, it would have picked up the KO on that Moltres. But now instead, opting for the Rockfall from the Metagross, it could have gone for the Steel Spike or the Quake instead, but opting for the super effective hit, always dangerous going into the weakness policy Pokemon. Victor managed to avoid it this turn, but it seems like Kevin went all in with the Rockfall and activated that weakness policy, as well as the Berserk as well, so Moltres gets even more out of the weakness policy because it did bring itself below half HP. But that looks like the light screen will be going up to try and help this Metagross survive this probable incoming darkness from the Moltres.
Yeah, and survive it definitely one would be trying to do, especially if Moltres is going for that max darkness into the Metagross this turn. But we do see a Volt Switch, doesn't quite pick up the KO on Grimmsnarl, and Victor has an opportunity to start to pivot here, bring in that Politoed, maybe going to be taking advantage of some blunder policy going on here, but is going to be able to set up the rain. Could be an indication that Kingdra is in the back, but one of the things about VGC with Politoed is that you definitely do not need the Kingdra to bring Politoed to the match, and that Max Darkness is going to be enough to KO the Metagross even through the screens, and that's a big knockout there for Victor, definitely securing his position in the driving seat of this match.
Yeah, so really seeing the downsides of going for that weakness policy activation on the Moltres, and why it's such a strong item, because you need to be able to hit the Pokemon super effectively to do the good damage, but especially with Moltres here, especially with Berserk boosting up as well, potentially pushing it over the edge to get that KO through the light screen. Now the Moltres is still in a very good position, even though the Tapu Fini can do some good damage to the Moltres and doesn't have to worry about a weakness policy being activated anymore on the Moltres. It's still going to be facing down that max airstream that can come out from the Moltres. No Hypnosis can come out from the Politoed, at least at this point, because of that Misty Terrain being set up, but it can still just go on the offensive with its water moves boosted by that rain as well. The Grimmsnarl going to be in range of any attack that the Politoed would want to go for, and the Moltres still can go for that +3 airstream into either Pokemon here, easily enough to pick up the knockout on the Grimmsnarl, and would do a huge amount of damage to the Tapu Fini, which probably at this point, without any Calm Mind boosts, probably still not even enough to KO the Moltres.
Possibly not, and Grimmsnarl just wanting to retreat back for Kevin. Bring in that Porygon 2, something that's very known for taking a lot of hits. And taking them really well. So here we are with the Max Airstream coming out from the Moltres, and a great turn there for Kevin, really, just being able to predict that it was going to be the Grimmsnarl that was going to be targeted by the Moltres, and just actually going for an attack on the Tapu Fini is really big going in here. So we do see a Moonblast going into the Moltres. You were absolutely right, Jamie. Doesn't quite do enough to pick up the knockout here. Didn't quite see what the Politoed did there, but I assume it missed and activated an item.
It did. It missed that Hydro Pump there, so it doesn't need the Hypnosis to miss to activate the Blunder policy. Hydro Pump can miss as well, and did there. So now the Politoed probably going to be moving for the Tapu Fini here as well. So very interesting item choice from the Politoed coming out here, being able to make use of those misses as well, and means it's not too bad if you do end up missing. But Moltres here able to survive the Moonblast. Now can respond with potentially a Hurricane coming from the Moltres, because that rain is set up, going to be doing perfect accuracy with the Hurricane, going to do a lot of damage. We saw how much the Airstream did into the Porygon 2, may just be enough to get the knockout with a Hurricane, but because of that speed boost, the Politoed's going first.
Absolutely he is, and Hydro Pump coming out into the Porygon 2, really not doing that much damage. A little bit disappointing, really, but Moltres with that Hurricane, perfect accuracy in the rain, and definitely enough stages of increased special attack in order for that to pick up the knockout on Porygon, no problemo. But the particular issue now that Victor has to face is that Tapu Fini is starting to build up some boost with Calm Minds, and if the Rillaboom isn't in the back, this could be an uphill battle.
Yeah, but now Kevin is down to his final 2 Pokemon, and Victor does have all 4 of his Pokemon. So if that Politoed is carrying Perish Song, this is the time to click it. So you can get that Perish Song off, because the Tapu Fini didn't opt for an attack that turn. It had the potential to try and knock out the Moltres there with the Moonblast, but instead going for that turn of setup. That means Victor still has all 4 of his Pokemon. So Kevin has to break through all 4 Pokemon in 3 turns if that Politoed is going to be clicking that Perish Song. It may not even need to. It could just go for the Hydro Pump to try and knock out that Grimmsnarl, which should be in range at this point, and then you still do have that +3 Moltres to be able to go for those Hurricanes. But it looks like a Fake Tears is going to be coming out from that Grimmsnarl.
Yeah, indeed. But the Politoed having that blunder policy is going to be the fastest thing on the field, and Perish Song, you are absolutely right there, Jamie. Everything's going to faint in 3 turns, and unfortunately Kevin has no way to switch out his Pokemon. In fact, he is going down from 2 Pokemon left to 1 in that Tapu Fini left over, and Politoed is possibly going to be knocked out here. Ooh, is going to be enough to hold on. Doesn't really make too much of a difference, but now it's a waiting game, and Victor definitely is unlikely to be able to lose this matchup.
Yeah, if you just click that Protect button with Victor, and then you just switch out your Pokemon, cycle that Protect back in. Because Kevin has used his Dynamax at this point, there's no way to break through those Protects with the Tapu Fini. So Victor does have a guaranteed way to win this match, and we just had to potentially wait out those 3 turns. I don't think the Tapu Fini can break through any of these Pokemon. We are going to be seeing the Protect from the Politoed, most likely going to be a Protect from that Moltres as well, as this is a very guaranteed way to win with Perish Song. You still have all 4 Pokemon. You have 2 Pokemon with access to Protect, so you might as well play to that guaranteed win if you do have that option.
Absolutely, and certainly one of the ways to really guarantee the win is to not actually have to attack at all, and that's exactly what Victor has put himself in a position to do this game. You know, the play really, if both Pokemon that Victor has in the back also have Protect, it doesn't really matter what happens. If neither Pokemon has Protect in the back, maybe you switch them out just to be safe and bring in that Protect again once both Pokemon are potentially knocked out. And if they don't get knocked out, well, there's nothing that Tapu Fini can do. Unfortunately, you can't hit Pokemon that aren't out on the field. So Rillaboom coming in, setting up that grassy terrain. Maybe we'll see a cheeky Hypnosis coming out here for Victor. A little bit of styling going on. Here it is. It does not land. Unfortunately, no more blunder policies to activate on that Politoed, and Muddy Water does come out, knocks out the Politoed, does a little bit of damage, drops the accuracy on Rillaboom, but not going to matter. At the end of this turn, there is guaranteed going to be 1 Pokemon left on the field for Victor and none for Kevin.
Yeah, that accuracy drop could have come into play if there was no Perish Song on the field. Could potentially have pulled some sort of comeback there, because the Rillaboom wasn't able to, may have missed its Grassy Glide. But at this point, you've got 2 Pokemon with Fake Out on your side of the field. You don't need to Protect at all. Fake Out's going to stop that Tapu Fini from moving regardless. So, yeah, very well played from Victor coming out here. Not opting to activate the weakness policy on the Metagross on Kevin's side of the field, but Kevin did opt in for the weakness policy activation on the Moltres, and that really came back to bite him, as the Metagross, even through the light screen, because it was strong enough to activate the Berserk on the Moltres, was able to take the knockout in 1 shot on that Metagross, and then really put the momentum really far into Victor's favor.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, at the point where you have a 3+ Moltres in front of you that's got an increased stage of speed, it's really difficult to find those spaces to just get in your attacks. If you are able to knock it out quite quickly after it's got that boost, maybe it only gets 1 KO and you KO that in return, but it's really quite unlikely that that happens with all of the offensive pressure that Moltres puts out once it's got its boost in place. So yeah, unfortunate there for Kevin, but Victor played that very well, and I think Kevin did really as much as he could with that Tapu Fini, coming back in the end game to give it a go, but of course too little too late with that Politoed having access to Perish Song.
Yeah, so maybe the Tapu Fini does need to be leading against this Moltres to be able to put on a bit more pressure. The Metagross can do some good damage. We saw it did over half to the Moltres, so if it gets its weakness policy activated, it can potentially knock out even the Dynamax Moltres in 1 shot. So you do have to be much more careful with the Metagross here and the activation of the weakness policy on the opposing Moltres. You do have 3 Pokemon, at least that were brought to that game, that can activate the weakness policy on the Moltres, but not going to be doing enough damage to be able to really put a stop to it, because you do have you get some Calm Minds up at least with the Tapu Fini, but at the same time the Moltres can just click Nasty Plot in front of that Calm Mind, and then the Moltres is still somewhat coming up on top because you get the +2 stages of increased special attack as opposed to the 1 stage of increased special defense. So the Moltres is a really big threat here for Kevin, and the best ways that he has to deal with it do put the Moltres into a really strong position because of that weakness policy and because of that Berserk. So you do have to be very careful of this Moltres.
Yeah, certainly. And the other issue that Kevin has is if he brings that Tapu Fini in early, then the Rillaboom can just come out and go for that Grassy Glide. You saw after the fake out from Raichu, it was a clean knockout on the Tapu Fini at the end of that game, and that's really good information for Victor here to be able to know that that Tapu Fini, depending on how it's trained, may have been a little bit in Victor's favour, but really quite unlikely based on what happened there and the speed of that health bar declining at the end of the last game. So yeah, really quite a tough position to be in, but we're going to see Kevin go for that same lead. We're going to get that Metagross and Grimmsnarl on the field, and of course the ever-present Galarian Moltres and Raichu landing on the field for Victor.
So we're in this awkward position again where you don't want to activate the weakness policy of your opponent, but at the same time, if you ignore the Moltres and don't go for that Rockfall, it has the opportunity to go for a Nasty Plot here. And if you ignore the Metagross, it can start boosting its defenses with the Steel Spikes or the Max Quakes. I probably would like to see a Max Quake coming out from the Metagross instead of that Rockfall, because then that does avoid the weakness policy on the Moltres, and you start to increase your special defense. Maybe the Quake boost as well as the Light Screen would be able to make that Metagross be able to survive a darkness that could come out from the Moltres. But at the same time, the Raichu still can put a stop to any of the Light Screens this turn at least, if it wants to fake out that Grimmsnarl.
Certainly could, and we are going to go straight into Dynamax here. Looks like Victor's side of the field going to be going first, and likely going to be that Galarian Moltres coming out into its Dynamax form. Likely going to see some more Max Airstreams coming out. Could potentially play a little bit more offensive. When you're 1 game up, it does give you the opportunity to maybe play a little bit more aggressively without so much fear that you're going to be going behind. But Kevin matching that Dynamax here, going for the Metagross most likely. Would like to see the Grimmsnarl going for the Dynamax here and go for a Max Starfall into the Moltres, but pretty unlikely to happen. And as we can see here, that Metagross is going for it once again. So we see how these turns shake up.
It looks like it's going to be that Light Screen again coming out from the Grimmsnarl, so wanting to increase that special defense even further, but that looks like it's going to be a side Volt Switch from the Raichu, so that's definitely one way to activate the weakness policy. You don't need to rely on the Metagross at all, you can activate it yourself.
Absolutely, and that Raichu's going to go straight back to Victor. Probably come out in favour of something that can help him a little bit more, possibly that Politoed coming out as well and launching out those Hydro Pumps. As well as Hypnoses, maybe force Kevin to bring his Tapu Fini into the danger zone here as Rain gets set up by that Politoed here. We do see a Max Darkness going straight on the offensive, straight into that Metagross. Not enough to pick up the KO. Is going to be able to survive this turn, and that weakness policy is going to be going up. And just like the first game where we saw weakness policy go up and Victor run away with the game, we might be seeing similar for Kevin here.
And that is going to be a Quake here instead into the Moltres, so does go for the Raichu, does go for the boosts instead of the special defense. Probably not going to matter too much at this point because you've taken so much damage, but I think that Victor did get the better end of that. If the Rockfall did go into the Moltres, if we saw a repeat of turn 1 last game in game 1, the Metagross would have come out on top there and be able to KO that Moltres, as we saw it did over half to Moltres without the weakness policy, and now the weakness policy was activated. So very good turn there coming out from Victor, still being able to activate the weakness policy on the Moltres and keeping it quite healthy as well. It still has the potential to get its Berserk activated once again. The Rillaboom coming in here because there's more fake out pressure onto the Grimmsnarl, so it wouldn't be able to go for something like a Spirit Break to try and do a bit more damage to the Moltres. And then the Moltres here still really threatening that Metagross with that Max Darkness once again. The Max Quakes are not going to be able to help it at this point. So a very nice play coming out there with the side Volt Switch to get that Moltres going even without the Metagross on Kevin's side of the field activating it for him.
Yeah, certainly. And the real question is, you know, is there anything that Kevin can now really do now that Moltres has got its boosts up for its special attack? Hasn't got the speed up yet, but equally that's going to be quite difficult for Kevin to take advantage of, with likely having a Tapu Fini in the back, and potentially, if it's like game 1, the Porygon 2 as well. So maybe Victor not actually worrying too much about the speed tiering going on here. Metagross going for a protect, and we see that reflect going up, Kevin just wanting to maybe play a little bit more defensively. And of course Max Darkness does go into the Metagross, doesn't do any damage, and U-turn coming out from the Rillaboom. Really nice play here, making sure that Victor still has access to that grassy terrain, and of course fake out for later in the game now that these Dynamaxes are starting to expire.
Yeah, being able to use up a turn of the Moltres' Dynamax there, it's still going to be very much in range of a Max Darkness here. We cycled the fake outs from Victor's side of the field, so does have the option to just fake out that Grimmsnarl. The Max Guard has happened for the Metagross here, so outside of a double Max Guard, that slot is being hit by a +2 Max Darkness at this point. So really not able to use his Dynamax too much here for Kevin's side of the field. Again, just managed to get the Max Quake. At least it KO'd the Politoads, but you have left the Moltres very healthy at this point, and still at 2 stages of increased special attack, and the potential to get that third because it still hasn't got the Berserk activated yet. So the Moltres is still looking in a very good position. It looks like the Grimmsnarl is going to be switching itself out here.
Certainly is, and Porygon 2 coming in its place, so definitely no speed concerns here. It's going to be quite challenging here for Kevin, though. Getting the double Max Guard, that is absolutely huge. Does give a lot of scope for Kevin to be able to maneuver in the next turn now that Porygon 2's on the field, and no special defense drop from the Max Darkness. So yeah, really nice position there for Kevin to be in. Fake out going into the Porygon 2, not doing too much damage, and of course Porygon nothing else really acting on that turn. So really the question is now is how does Kevin really leverage the Porygon 2 now that Moltres hasn't got its Dynamax form anymore and can't be dropping any of its stats?
You can set up the Trick Room now, at least, so you can petition your Tapu Fini and your Grimmsnarl into a position that you can be able to deal with this Moltres. Very crucial Max Guard there, not just because of the knockout on that Metagross not happening. Not getting that special defense drop on that Porygon 2 could be very crucial as well, because Porygon 2 is such a bulky Pokemon. Every little bit helps, and a special defense drop would have really helped out against that Porygon 2, but most likely going to be able to survive whatever would be thrown at it here. Maybe a Hurricane Confusion or a Fiery Wrath could throw some things off for that Porygon 2, but if it does manage to get that Trick Room set up, then Kevin could be in a very good position to be able to actually deal with this Moltres.
It certainly could be, and that Metagross definitely not wanting to stay on the field to find out what was going to be happening. Raichu there going for an Eerie Impulse, I believe. Was that, or...?
Yep, that was an Eerie Impulse, trying to catch the Tapu Fini, but it's the Grimmsnarl instead, so not going to matter too much with that drop of the special attack. And Fire Wrath does end up flinching the Porygon 2, I think. It didn't look like it moved there, so Fire Wrath coming in clutch there.
Definitely was, and you know, those special attack drops are really going to be quite crucial for that Raichu to get onto the Porygon 2. Just make it really, really passive, and while Porygon 2 can stay on the field forever and carry on recovering, if it's not doing any damage, aside from critical hits, of course, then it's not going to be doing too much work. And Charm there coming out from the Raichu, going even further to bring that Grimmsnarl's offensive stats down.
Yeah, so the Moltres feels safe to go for a nasty plot here to put itself to +4 stages, going back down to 3, but then up to 4 again once, because the Spirit Break's going to drop its special attack, but Berserk's going to put it right back up there. But the Fire Wrath wasn't fired off this time, so maybe the Porygon 2 is going to be able to get out that Trick Room, and it does look like that is going to be the case. So Grimmsnarl not going to do too much damage thanks to that Charm. It would put that Moltres very low if it didn't get charmed by the Raichu, but now that the Trick Room is set up, the Pokemon on Kevin's side of the field most likely going to underspeed this Moltres and be able to deal with it somewhat at this point. Grimmsnarl maybe not so much at this point, but the Porygon 2 still hasn't been Eerie Impulsed yet. The Eerie Impulse did go into the Grimmsnarl, so Porygon 2 can still do a lot of damage to this Moltres. So this could be the opening that Kevin needs to get back into this game, because he can finally get into a position where he can attack the Moltres first, and it is below half HP at this point, so that did activate the Berserk, but now it potentially could be in range of the attacks that Kevin wants to go for.
Certainly, and you know, when you're just below half and you've got two Pokemon, maybe one Pokemon's had some attract drops, but still hitting super effective, and of course, Porygon 2 can do some damage. It won't do as much as you'd really like to against a Moltres, but you know, it's still some damage and you can really whittle these Pokemon down. But Grimmsnarl deciding to just reset its stats, switch itself out for Metagross and pile on a little bit more offensive pressure, while probably Kevin thinking that Moltres is quite rightly going to be playing a little bit more defensive, going for the Protect here. And we see the Rillaboom switching in for the Raichu, just bringing that Fake Out into play, but is paralyzed by the Tri-Attack. Definitely not the status that Kevin would want to inflict. Maybe 25% chance that the Rillaboom doesn't get off a Fake Out, which would be very crucial this turn. But otherwise, will be going a little bit faster than Kevin would want on this turn now in Trick Room.
At least you can still go for the fastest Grassy Glide, because the Grassy Terrain did disappear this turn, but because of that paralysis, probably going to be the slowest Pokemon in Trick Room, so probably only going to matter if the Rillaboom isn't able to move here. If it does offer something like a Fake Out or a U-turn, the Grass Move's not going to be too effective here, so maybe wanting to go for a Fake Out into either of Kevin's Pokemon, so the Moltres has the chance to go for one of those boosted Fiery Wraths to take out the Metagross and do a lot of damage to the Porygon 2. Rock Slide may be very close if it's able to knock out the Moltres. We saw Tri-Attack on that Porygon 2, probably not going to be enough on the Moltres either. But Rillaboom's not even going to risk that paralysis. It wants to just switch straight out into this Raichu.
Yeah, quite a good play for Victor there to just try and be a little bit more consistent. Tri-Attack going into Moltres, though, doing almost half of the damage that it had remaining, and Rock Slide is enough to finish it off coming out from that Metagross. So really bold play there from Kevin, just going for it in the face of Fake Out, maybe wanting to leverage the fact that paralysis was still in play, and this does put him in a really nice position where it is down to he is actually being able to knock out some of Victor's Pokemon, and now Victor's down to 2. Kevin's got 4. It does feel a little bit more in Kevin's favor, even though it didn't quite start off that way.
Yeah, that double max guard I think was very crucial, because the Metagross is able to survive no special defense drops on the Porygon 2. If it did get a special defense drop, maybe Victor wouldn't have been inclined to go for that nasty plot. So instead, just maybe content to go on the offense because of that drop. Could have done enough damage. And there was at least the flinch that happened to stop the Trick Room going up, but then it just went up the turn afterwards. So, and it seemed like Trick Room was all that Kevin needed to be able to position himself into a way that he could deal with that Moltres. As we saw, the Tri-Attack and the Rock Slide was enough there. So Porygon 2 coming in, very crucial there to be able to deal with the Moltres. Even though it's not the Pokemon that's doing the big damage to the Moltres, very crucial in positioning Kevin's side of the field so he can actually deal with the Moltres.
Well, I think the really important thing there is that it was the time that Kevin took to take away the Dynamax form on the Moltres, gave him the ability to do, I'm not going to say double damage because that's not quite how it works, but you're doing the right amount of damage to the Moltres, and it's such a naturally bulky Pokemon that it's really hard to knock it out without super effective hits, and of course that's why that usually plays weakness policy. So yeah, really nice timing there, I think, from Kevin to come back in that game, and Victor just not quite being able to do enough quickly enough for him to take the win. Going into team preview now, Jamie, what do you think that these players need to really be focusing on coming into this match in their league matchups?
I think the Moltres is still very crucial for Victor here, and we saw 2 different ways that it got activated by its weakness policy, but it did need +3 special attack to be able to knock out that Metagross in one shot. So we're going to have some interesting mind games if both players opt for the same leads, because you do want to try and avoid activating the weakness policies on both the Metagross and the Moltres. But at the same time, you need to be doing super effective damage to be able to do big damage to those Pokemon. Yeah. We saw that just +2 was not enough, so we're going to have to see if either players are playing around the weakness policy activation again, because the Metagross comes out on top if there is the weakness policy activation for the Metagross, if it goes for that Rockfall into the Moltres, assuming that the Grimmsnarl is able to get that light screen up. But you do need to be able to get that boosted stage of special attack on the Moltres to be able to safely target down that Metagross with the darkness. So It's going to be very crucial positioning both Pokemon here. Whether we see even a nasty plot on turn 1, if the Quake happens once again into the Raichu with the Metagross, then you'd be able to get that nasty plot up for somewhat free. And it is going to be at least the Metagross and the Grimmsnarl coming out from Kevin's side of the field, and it is that Raichu and Moltres once again for Victor's side of the field. So we are in this awkward position where you've got to try and avoid activating the weakness policies on both of the Pokemon on both sides of the field, but at the same time you need to be going on the offense to actually do some big damage to both those Pokemon.
You certainly do, and you know, I do respect both of these players quite a lot for just keeping on with the same decision-making process. Of course, every time you go into this into these matches, you've already exhausted one of the potential options that you could potentially pick in these situations, and so these players are potentially going to switch up. Maybe they're not, and one player switches up and another one doesn't, and it all goes differently. As you said, Jamie, it really will depend on which weakness policy activates, what boosts come out from the initial Dynamax, which again looks like that Moltres is coming out for Victor and going for its Dynamax form. So yeah, question as to whether it's going to be that Max Darkness or that Max Airstream, and of course what that Metagross does in reply.
And we've got to see if the Raichu opts to fake out the Grimmsnarl to stop any light screens, or if it goes for that side Volt Switch once again into the Moltres to get that guaranteed activation of the weakness policy. But both Pokemon are going to be Dynamaxing here on turn 1. Moltres once again for Victor's side of the field, and it is going to be that Metagross, unfortunately, still wanting to see that Grimmsnarl go for the Dynamax, but it is still going to be that Metagross. Most likely wanting to get that light screen up once again, so the Metagross is able to survive this turn. If the Grimmsnarl gets that light screen, Metagross does survive this turn, but Raichu is going to be putting a stop to that with the fake out.
Certainly is, and likely that the Metagross is going to be surviving that turn anyway, especially with the Max Airstream going into Grimmsnarl. But without that weakness policy boost, we know that Metagross just isn't quite powerful enough Moltres isn't quite powerful enough to knock out that Metagross without its boost. We do see Max Quake coming out into the Raichu, so a good play there on both fronts. Both trainers just trying to boost up their respective Dynamax Pokemon. Raichu not going to be able to get knocked out this turn because of that Focus Sash, but really quite a big special defense boost here for Metagross. No weakness policies activated, but that Metagross is looking more and more likely to be able to just launch attacks into that Moltres without fear of being knocked out in return.
Yeah, a really good turn for Kevin there. I think he got the better end of that trade, because now if you set up the light screen, which you can't stop on Victor's side of the field, if you set up that light screen, even the Volt Switch into your Moltres will mean that the Metagross is easily able to survive that darkness. You can't even go for something like Charm with the Raichu because of that clear body onto the Metagross. So the Metagross is looking very dangerous here. That light screen is going to be put up by that Grimmsnarl.
Certainly is, and that's going to make sure that Metagross isn't attacked. As we see the side Volt Switch go there, so Victor just really prioritizing more and more damage onto that Moltres, but I just can't see that it's without a critical hit it's going to be able to knock out the Metagross, and if it does, I don't know about you, Jamie, it feels to me like that Metagross is going on the offensive and really going for that Moltres this turn. Could be going for another special defense boost, but just doesn't feel like that's going to put Kevin enough forward. You've really got to use your Dynamax turns positively, and certainly going for a Max Quake would be the opposite of that. But Politoed coming in for that Raichu, Volt Switching out there, going to be setting up the Rain for the Victor's side of the field, and that Max Airstream is going to be coming out, picking up the KO on Grimmsnarl, and really going to be up to Kevin now as to what he uses here with the Metagross. Does he go on the offensive, or does he just opt for another Max Quake?
It looks like he's going on the offensive with that Rockfall into the Moltres, but no weakness policy was activated. That means Moltres does survive this turn. The weakness policy on Moltres was already activated, but now you've got that Berserk going. The Sandstorm would have picked up the 1 HP on the Raichu as well, so Rockfall, a nice play there to try and cover for that Raichu, but the Volt Switch means that it is able to survive this turn. The Rain is overwritten, at least from the Politoed, so its Hydro Pumps are going to be doing a lot less damage at this point, but the Metagross is still going to have that increased stage of special defense thanks to that earlier Quake. It has been ignored so far, so probably still not going to be in range of that darkness that can come out from the Moltres. The Quake effectively cancelling out the Berserk, so should be able to survive at that point. Tapu Fini is not on the field yet at this point, and we do know that Politoed does have access to that Hypnosis, though. So if you do want to stop the Trick Room, it's got to be that Hypnosis at this point into the Porygon 2. You don't even have Fire Wrath available to try and flinch that Porygon 2. But at the same time, the Porygon 2 could have just switched in to try and bait the Hypnosis to switch out back into that Tapu Fini, because the Metagross is looking reasonably comfortable at this point. It doesn't have to worry too much about the Moltres at this point. If it does go for that Darkness into the Metagross, it's going to do a lot of damage, but most likely not enough, and you are now in range with the Moltres to be knocked out by the Metagross.
Certainly, and it's going to be a max airstream into that Porygon 2, so likely a follow-up with the Hypnosis from the Politoed, and Metagross still unharmed, and likelihood is that he is going to be able to hit the Hypnosis, so that Porygon is going to be having a nap for a few turns at the least. That Metagross, though, is still unscathed, and really, it's going to be quite difficult for the Moltres to take down after this turn, given that now that we are a few turns in, while it does have its Berserk activated, it does have its weakness policy activated. That Metagross has got 2 stages of special defense. We are going to be going back to Fiery Wrath rather than Max Darkness, which is both spread damage and less powerful. And of course, we've still got the light screen that Kevin set up a couple of turns ago. So it feels like we're heading towards a game where Kevin has a Metagross on the field that can't really be touched.
Yeah, and you do need to go for that Fiery Wrath really to be able to deal with this Metagross, and then that would just activate the weakness policy and most likely not going to knock it out because of those Quake boosts, and then that just makes the Metagross become a huge threat. At least you don't get the weakness policy activated while the Metagross still has access to its Dynamax moves, but at this point you're down to 3 Pokemon on Victor's side of the field. You've got 2 very low Pokemon, maybe even in range of Rock Slide at this point. It would be close on the Politoed given the damage it took before, and you still have the potential to just switch out that Porygon 2 if you did bring the Tapu Fini once again. Could put a stop to that Hypnosis that could come out into the Metagross as well. So definitely an awkward position for Victor going forward here, because you've got to do some damage to that Metagross, but at the same time, if you do click that much weaker Fire Wrath than Max Darkness into that Metagross, you're going to activate that weakness policy.
You certainly are, and Rillaboom coming in here for Victor, bringing back that Politoed, so nothing like a Perish Song to start really wrapping up the game. Obviously Kevin has the option to switch about as well. Hurricane coming out from the Moltres, not enough to pick up the Porygon, KO on the Porygon 2, and Rock Slide coming out is going to be enough to pick up the KO onto the Moltres, and now it looks like that Perish Song is going to be out of the question for Victor to try and get back into this game like he did in a previous game. So yeah, looking like Kevin's going to be on the front foot going into the final sort of 4 or 5 turns of the game.
Yeah, if you do have that Tapu Fini waiting in the back now, the Rillaboom is in and can't switch out anymore, so you do have the option of just switching into your Tapu Fini, overwriting the grassy terrain with that misty terrain, and then Hypnosis is no longer a factor here. And like you said, the Perish Song would be a very good way of breaking through this Metagross, because you don't need to do any damage to it, even with those increased stages of special defense. It won't matter because it will just faint in 3 turns, but you can't really do that as well with Victor's side of the field at this point, because the Politoed would just KO itself with the Rillaboom as well. So it is definitely very awkward for Victor's side of the field here, because you just switch in that Tapu Fini, you turn off any potential of that Hypnosis as well, you reduce the damage that can come out from the Rillaboom. So it's looking very, very good for Kevin here. Even though he didn't get the weakness policy activated on that Metagross, it looked like he didn't need that. So you were able to just go for the damage, even with just Rock Slide, even with just those Quakes. It seems like it was able to do enough damage here.
Certainly was, and seems like Victor's game plan was to just hope that Kevin wouldn't really go on the offensive, maybe playing a little bit more defensive, but going on the offensive is exactly what Victor's going to be doing here, going for that Wood Hammer, picking up the knockout onto the Porygon 2, and indeed, Jamie, that Hypnosis does not connect with the Metagross and doesn't quite get knocked out in return by Rock Slide. So a little bit of a window here for Kevin, but we'll have to see if that Tapu Fini was indeed in the back for Kevin now that we are down 2 Pokemon to 2, I believe.
It was the Zapdos waiting in the back, and I think that the Raichu didn't. It was down to its sash, but the Sandstorm didn't actually hit it. So I think there may be that Raichu waiting in the back. So there is actually still the potential of that Perish Song coming out. Don't know how likely it is at this point because you've taken so much damage on the Politoed, and the Raichu is just on 1 HP and can't protect. But you can at least get the Perish Song off first if you want it, and you can start going for Hypnosis as well now very freely. You went for it last turn and still managed to miss with that Hypnosis, but that's the reason you run the Blunder policy. Because the Politoed was underspeeding the Pokemon there, it missed the Hypnosis, but now it has effectively a second chance to be able to get that Hypnosis off because it now outspeeds both the Pokemon. So you probably do want to be relying on that Hypnosis at that point. You do have the Raichu that can switch in to try and soak up some of the electric moves that can come out from the Zapdos, but at the same time, you can just go for those Hurricanes, and it looks like we are seeing a Hypnosis come out onto that Magikarp, and this time it does connect.
Does indeed, but we saw a fake out coming out from that Rillaboom, so it looks like a timeout there. We saw that Victor was trying to switch out and didn't quite make it in time. That Rillaboom is going to get knocked out by the Hurricane, so yeah, a little bit unfortunate there for Victor. He's shaking his head there, not particularly happy with his inputs, but you know, I think it was going to be a pretty difficult end game for him to play, as you mentioned, with that 1 HP Raichu in the back that went away right at the start of the game, and I completely forgot about it, if I'm completely honest. So yeah, that Politoed is going to be the fastest thing on the field. Maybe gets a Hypnosis onto the Zapdos, but one of the mechanics of Perish Song, which is the real thing that would potentially win the game here, is that the last Pokemon to faint decides the winner on the field, and Kevin's Pokemon are both slower than Victor's, so Perish Song not even an option here.
Yeah, especially with that Blunder policy, a little bit of anti-synergy there with the Perish Song, but that's just a reason to show everyone why you do not have Fake Out in that top slot. It is not a move you want to click if you time out, so you should definitely have a different move in that top slot instead. Hydro Pump going to be coming out here with those Quake boosts, with that Light Screen still up, really doing no damage to that Metagross at all, so it's going to be a real struggle for Victor to be able to come out into this match. Able to stop the Zapdos movement just for one turn with the Fake Out, but at this point, that's used up now, and their Politoed and Raichu are such low HP. The rain is still up, so even though the Lightning Rod is activated, you can't go for that 100% accurate Thunderbolt because of the rain of your own Politoed. You've given the 100% accuracy to that Zapdos with its Hurricane now, and could pick up the knockout on either Pokemon. So even though the Metagross is sleeping here, it is facing down 2 special attackers. With those Quake boosts, it's still able to shrug off those moves effectively. Hypnosis is going to stall out a little bit longer. The Zapdos is going to be going to sleep by their Hypnosis. The Raichu not going to be doing too much damage. We've seen Volt Twitch as its only offensive move, and you can see how little damage that's doing. It looks like the grassy terrain may even recover more than that Volt Switch, so it's still looking very rough for Victor.
Very rough indeed, with Stomping Tantrum coming out and knocking out the Politoed here. And it is going to be Raichu versus the world for Victor, and yeah, likely that Kevin is going to be taking this game home. And right at the end of this game, I do have a confession, JB, that I have to, you know, bring out into the open. I do.
You're going to say you put Fake Out first.
I do. I absolutely do. So I'm going to give Victor props for that, because he puts his moves in the right place, JB. That's all I'm saying.
But then you can see there that is definitely the move you do not want to click if you do time out. It only works on the first turn, so maybe if you time out on the very first turn of the game it will work out, but I think even if the Rillaboom was able to move there, facing down the Metagross and the Zapdos, it could have potentially U-turned out into the Raichu. It could have gone for the hard switch. It looked like that was what Victor was going for, but even if it did, the Raichu just takes the Hurricane and gets knocked out at that point, and it didn't really seem like Victor had enough offensive pressure once that Moltres went down to be able to break through Kevin, and it looks like Kevin is once again going to be moving on to the top 8 of this next spring series.
He certainly is, and that was a really tight game there, where I do think there was an opportunity in the end game for Victor with maybe a Hydro Pump critical hit. And maybe that's what he was trying to do, cycle those fake outs, bring that Rillaboom in, and maybe stop the Moltres from moving just quite so quickly and keep a little bit of Hypnosis pressure. But, you know, you're really stacking all of the eggs in that basket, and that basket's got some holes in the bottom of it, unfortunately, when it comes to accuracy. So, unfortunate there for Victor, but really well played by Kevin. And I'm glad that game did go to free, or that match went to 3 games, just so we could see all of the different routes that these players had available, especially when they led the same in each one and something completely different happened every single game.
You can see how much play changes when weakness policies are active on the field. The Moltres is, you would assume, to be the better Pokemon to deal with the Metagross, but then the Metagross was able to come out on top in 2 out of the 3 games. So not what you expect based on that, but then that just forces plays like the Airstreams into the Grimmsnarl. You want to be getting those Darknesses down into the Metagross, but then if you do that, the weakness policy gets activated. So it's very awkward to play around those, and you can see we got to see 3 different interactions of trying to play around those weakness policies, and it looks like the Metagross came up on top of the Moltres here. So Kevin is going to be advancing into that top 8 for tomorrow. We're going to be jumping into another short break, and we'll be right back with the 6th game of this top 16 of the Victory Road Spring Series.